Once upon a time, in a city where wealth spoke before character and appearances decided a person's value, there lived a woman whose name carried weight long before she entered a room. Adorank Bello was not born into privilege, but she carried her success like armor. Every step she took announced achievement. Every gathering she hosted was a reminder that she had arrived, and that others were still trying to catch up. Her mansion stood high above the city, wrapped in glass and steel, a symbol of triumph meant to be seen from a distance. Inside her world, everything had a purpose. Every smile was measured. Every friendship served a function. She surrounded herself with people who applauded her rise and echoed her opinions. People who laughed when she laughed and fell silent when she frowned. Power had shaped her social circle, and admiration was the currency that kept it intact. But beneath the laughter and music, there was an unspoken rule in Adarank's life. Some people mattered, others did not. And those who did not matter were expected to know it. Every morning, long before the city fully woke, a car waited at the gates of her estate. The engine hummed softly, the interior spotless, the doors unlocked with quiet precision. Behind the wheel sat Sadiq. He arrived early, always early, never rushed, never late. His movements were efficient, almost deliberate. He checked mirrors twice, adjusted the seat once, sat still until called. To the outside world, he looked like many drivers employed by the wealthy. Plain clothes, calm posture, neutral expression. But there was something about the way he carried himself that unsettled people who paid close attention. Sadiq spoke only when spoken to, and when he did, his words were respectful, measured and brief. He did not explain himself. He did not defend himself. He did not attempt to impress anyone. To Adorank, this quietness was irritating. She preferred people who scrambled for approval, people who reacted, people who showed emotion when she pressed against their pride. Sadiq did none of that. Sometimes she tested him. She commented on his salary in front of guests. She joked about his future as if it were already decided. She referred to him as just a driver, even when others were present. Her friends laughed, some out of comfort, some out of fear, a few out of genuine cruelty. Sadiq remained still. No tightening of the jaw, no shift in posture, no reaction she could point to and claim victory over. There were moments, subtle and fleeting, when outsiders noticed him. A visitor once mistook him for a security consultant because of how he stood. Another guest paused mid-conversation, distracted by the calm way Sadiq observed the room before opening a door. But those moments passed quickly. People like Adorank did not encourage curiosity about those beneath them. As weeks passed, the city began to buzz with talk of her birthday celebration. Adorank was approaching another milestone, and she intended to mark it loudly. This was not going to be an ordinary party. It was going to be an announcement, a reminder, a declaration of her place among the elite. The planning consumed her. Designers came and went. Caterers presented endless options. Lists were reviewed, revised, rewritten. Nothing was left to chance, and with each planning meeting came stories, laughter and mockery. One afternoon, as Sadiq drove her and two close friends across the city, the conversation turned, as it often did, to entertainment. "Everyone will be there," one friend said. "Investors, media people, people who matter." Adorank smiled, watching her reflection in the window. "And people who don't," she replied. The car filled with laughter. Then she glanced into the mirror and saw Sadiq's eyes. Calm, focused, forward. An idea surfaced. "What if we invite him?" she said lightly. The laughter paused, then returned louder. "The driver?" someone asked. "Yes," Adorank replied. "Why not? Let him see how real success looks." She enjoyed the thought immediately, the image of him standing awkwardly among wealth, unsure where to place his hands, unsure how to belong. It felt harmless to her, entertaining. Educational. She leaned forward slightly. "Sadiq." "Yes, ma'am." "You're invited to my birthday party." The words lingered in the air longer than expected. Her friends waited for confusion, for questions, for discomfort. Instead, Sadiq replied simply, "Thank you, ma'am." No pause, no hesitation, no visible surprise. The laughter died down, replaced by exchanged glances. Adorank frowned briefly, then dismissed it. She told herself the calm response meant submission. That acceptance meant he already felt out of place. She leaned back, satisfied. The invitation was real. The date confirmed, the plan set in motion. And as the car continued through crowded streets, the city moved on, unaware that something had already shifted. Because stories like this do not begin at the party. They begin in silence. They begin in moments people ignore. And somewhere beyond the noise of luxury and expectation, Sadiq returned to his routine. Quiet, controlled, unrevealing, waiting. The invitation had been sent, the date had been fixed, and to everyone watching from the outside, life continued exactly as it always had. Morning after morning, the gates of Adarang Bellows estate opened before sunrise. The same luxury car waited in the same position, polished until it reflected the pale sky above it. And behind the wheel sat Sadiq, unmoving, as if time itself adjusted around him. Adarang barely noticed. Her days were filled with appointments, fittings, calls, and rehearsed conversations. The closer her birthday came, the louder her world became. Designers debated color schemes, event planners whispered timelines. Friends argued over seating arrangements and appearance. Everything revolved around image. Everything except the man who drove her everywhere. Sadiq remained invisible by design. He listened while conversations floated around him. He absorbed details without reacting. He learned the habits of people who believed they were untouchable. And when the engine turned off and the doors closed behind them, he carried that silence with him. There is a certain discipline required to live unnoticed. It shows in the way a person walks, in the way they observe without staring, in the way they move through crowded rooms without leaving a trace. Sadiq had mastered that discipline long before he ever became a driver. One evening, after leaving Adarang at a private gathering, he did not return to the estate. Instead, he guided the car through parts of the city that wealth rarely visited. Streets worn smooth by time, buildings that no longer impressed anyone. He parked beside a modest structure with peeling paint and quiet hallways. No doorman, no security, just a door that opened with a familiar sound. Inside, his room was spare. Not poor, not neglected, simply controlled. The bed was neatly made, shoes aligned against the wall, a single chair positioned where it had always been. There were no decorations meant to impress, no reminders of ambition, no photographs displayed, nothing accidental. Sadiq removed his jacket and hung it carefully. Then he knelt and reached beneath the bed, pulling out a box that had been hidden there for years. The box had traveled with him across different lives, different cities, different identities. He placed it on the table and sat across from it, not touching it immediately. The room was silent except for the steady rhythm of his breathing. Some memories demand patience. When he finally opened the lid, he did so without hesitation. Inside lay carefully folded clothing, wrapped in protective layers. Not trendy, not worn thin. Preserved. He lifted the three-piece suit slowly. The fabric caught the light in a way that revealed its quality without boasting. The stitching was precise, the structure unmistakable. This was not something purchased casually, it was something chosen. Sadiq held it up and studied it briefly. No nostalgia crossed his face, no regret, no longing, only recognition. Beneath the suit were photographs turned face down. He did not flip them over. He never did. He already knew what they showed. He folded the suit again with the same care and placed it back inside the box. Then, after a moment's thought, he closed the lid, not with finality, but with intent. The next morning, he left earlier than usual. He walked into a tailor's shop that sat quietly between businesses, struggling to survive. The bell above the door rang softly. The tailor looked up, paused, and nodded. No introductions were needed. Measurements were taken with precision. Adjustments discussed in low tones. There were no suggestions of style, only refinement. The tailor's hands moved with respect, as though working on something that mattered. Sadiq returned days later to try the suit on. The mirror reflected a version of him no one in Adarang's world had ever seen. Not transformed. Revealed. He stood still as the tailor adjusted the shoulders, then the sleeves. Each correction subtle, each change deliberate. When the final pin was removed, the tailor stepped back. Sadik looked at his reflection, and for the first time since the invitation, his eyes changed. Not with pride, not with defiance, with certainty. Meanwhile, Adarank's excitement reached its peak. She spoke of the party as if it were already happening. She laughed about Sadik's invitation to anyone who would listen. She imagined the moment he would arrive, already uncomfortable, already diminished. She practiced how she would introduce him, where she would seat him, how she would remind everyone, gently but firmly, of his place. She believed anticipation belonged only to her, but anticipation has many forms. One afternoon, parked outside an exclusive club, Sadik waited as Adarank and her friends talked behind him. "I hope he actually comes," one of them said. "It would ruin the joke if he didn't." Adarank smiled. "Oh, he'll come. People like him always do." Sadik adjusted the rearview mirror slightly. For a brief second, his eyes met his own reflection. Not the reflection of a driver, the reflection of someone who understood exactly what was coming. That night, alone again, he stood in front of the mirror in his room. No music, no distractions. He straightened his posture, not to practice, but to remember. Some people rehearse for moments like this. Others simply arrive ready. The city continued counting down to the party. Lights were installed, invitations confirmed, the spectacle prepared, and beneath it all, unseen and unannounced, Sadik remained steady. Because the most unsettling truths are not rushed, they are timed. And the clock was moving. As the day of the celebration drew closer, the city itself seemed to respond. Traffic slowed near wealthy districts. Conversations in private lounges lingered longer than usual. Invitations were rechecked. Outfits were reconsidered. For many, Adarank Bello's birthday was not just another event on the calendar. It was a social checkpoint, a place where relevance could be measured, where presence alone carried meaning. Adarank thrived in this atmosphere. She woke earlier than usual, energized by anticipation. Her phone rarely left her hand. Calls came in one after another, each one confirming what she already believed. That her party would be talked about, that people would remember it, that she would once again be the center of attention. She moved through her mansion inspecting every detail, the lighting, the seating, the flow of the evening. She corrected staff sharply, not out of necessity, but out of habit. Authority had become part of her posture. Everything had to be flawless. Flawlessness reassured her. Throughout it all, Sadik remained present but distant. He drove her to final fittings. He waited while decorators argued over details. He opened the car door when she was finished and closed it without comment. To Adarank, he was background noise. Predictable, contained. She spoke freely in front of him, never lowering her voice. "This party will remind people who matters," she told a friend during one ride. "Some people forget their place. Nights like this correct that." Laughter followed. Sadik drove on. There is a particular blindness that comes with power, a belief that familiarity equals understanding. Adarank had watched Sadik for years, yet she had never truly seen him. She assumed routine meant limitation. That silence meant submission. That calm meant acceptance. She never considered discipline. In the days before the party, Sadik's behavior shifted just enough to matter, but not enough to draw suspicion. He organized his belongings with greater intention. Items he rarely touched were cleaned and set aside. His shoes were polished until they reflected light sharply. His movements grew slower, more deliberate, as though he were aligning himself with something internal. When spoken to, his tone remained unchanged, respectful, even, controlled. But there was a difference now. He was no longer simply responding. He was preparing. One afternoon, caught in traffic outside a private venue, Adarank leaned forward slightly, her mood lighter than usual. "You'll be busy that night," she said casually. "Yes, ma'am." "A lot of important people will be there." "Yes, ma'am." She smiled, pleased by the thought. "I hope you understand how things work," she added. "Some spaces aren't meant for everyone." "Yes, ma'am." The exchange ended there. She mistook his answer for agreement. What she failed to recognize was that understanding does not always require compliance. As evening approached on the day of the party, Adarank's mansion transformed completely. The staff doubled. Security tightened. Music tested the walls, the smell of expensive food filled the air. She dressed slowly, carefully, each piece chosen not for comfort, but for impact. She stood before a mirror longer than usual, adjusting angles, testing expressions. She wanted admiration without effort, respect without challenge, attention without competition. When she finally stepped away, she was satisfied. Outside, guests began arriving early. Cars lined the drive, laughter spilled from open doors. Compliments were exchanged before people even entered the house. Adarang greeted them with ease, her confidence reinforced with every familiar face. "This is going to be unforgettable," she said more than once. Meanwhile, far from the music and conversation, Sadiq stood alone. His room was quiet. The box sat open on the bed, its contents revealed once more. This time there was no hesitation, no pause. He dressed carefully. The suit settled on him naturally, as though it had been waiting. The fabric moved with him, not against him. He adjusted the jacket once, then again, ensuring every detail aligned. When he stood before the mirror, the reflection did not surprise him. It reminded him, not of who he had been, but of who he still was. He fastened the last button, checked his cuffs, and reached for his coat. Outside, the night had fully arrived. Lights glowed, music pulsed. The mansion waited, filled with voices and expectations. And inside that space, Adarang Bello laughed, confident that the story would unfold exactly as she planned. She believed she was hosting a spectacle. She did not realize she was about to witness one, because control, when assumed, is fragile, and the door was moments away from opening. By the time night fully settled over the city, Adarang Bello's mansion had transformed into something more than a residence. It had become a symbol, a carefully curated space designed to reflect power, relevance, and control. Soft lights traced the edges of marble walls. Music drifted through the air in calculated rhythm, never too loud, never too quiet. Waiters moved in seamless patterns, trays balanced perfectly, smiles rehearsed. Every detail spoke of money spent with intention. Guests arrived dressed to be noticed. Some came early, eager to secure their place. Others arrived fashionably late, confident their presence alone was an event. Conversations overlapped, names were dropped, alliances subtly displayed. This was Adarang's domain. She moved through the room like a conductor, acknowledging greetings with practiced ease. Compliments met her at every turn. "Magnificent. Exquisite taste. Only you could pull this off." She accepted each word as confirmation, yet beneath her calm exterior she was waiting. Not anxiously, not openly, but deliberately. Every few minutes her attention shifted toward the entrance. She masked it well, checking only briefly, as though scanning the room rather than the doorway. Her friends noticed. "He's really taking his time," one of them murmured, amused. Adarang smiled, lifting her glass. "Let him. The longer he waits, the worse it'll be for him." She imagined the moment with satisfaction. Sadiq walking in late, drawing attention for all the wrong reasons. Guests turning to look. The quiet judgment settling in. The laughter restrained but sharp. In her mind, the scene was already complete. Time passed. The party deepened. Conversations grew louder. Drinks flowed more freely. But the anticipation lingered, now shared among a small group who had heard the story. "Who are we waiting for?" someone asked. Adarang waved dismissively. "Just my driver." The word landed differently now. It carried curiosity instead of humor. Some guests glanced toward the door. Others laughed lightly, expecting a harmless spectacle. Adarang checked her phone again. Still nothing. For the first time that evening, uncertainty brushed against her confidence. She pushed it away. Control had never failed her before. Then the music softened slightly, not by design but by instinct, as if the room itself sensed a change. The entrance doors began to open, conversations slowed. Laughter thinned, eyes shifted. Sadiq stepped inside. He did not rush. He did not pause. He moved forward with quiet assurance, his presence immediately altering the energy of the room. The suit fit him perfectly, not tight, not loose, balanced in a way that spoke of intention rather than expense. His shoes reflected the light beneath him. His posture was straight, natural, unforced. For a brief moment, the room fell into silence. This was not the man they had imagined. He did not look out of place. He did not look unsure. He did not look like someone who had wandered in by mistake. He looked as though he belonged. Whispers rippled outward. "Who is he? Do you recognize him? He looks important." Phones appeared subtly, cameras angled discreetly, smiles shifted from polite to intrigued. Sadiq acknowledged the room with a simple nod, his expression calm, his eyes observant. He did not seek attention, yet it found him instantly. Adorank froze. Her smile faltered, just enough to be noticed by those closest to her. Confusion crossed her face, followed by disbelief. This was not the outcome she had prepared for. She searched for signs of discomfort in him. A nervous glance, an uncertain step, something she could use to reclaim the narrative. There was nothing. Sadiq walked further into the room, and guests instinctively made space for him. A man near the bar leaned forward, curiosity overtaking restraint. "Good evening," he said, extending a hand. "Good evening," Sadiq replied, shaking it firmly. The exchange was effortless. Adorank felt her grip on the evening loosen. She laughed suddenly, louder than necessary, drawing attention back to herself. "Oh, that's just my driver," she said, stepping forward. "I invited him for fun." The words echoed, but their impact fell flat. Guests glanced from her to him, then back again. The contrast was striking. Sadiq inclined his head politely toward her. "Thank you for inviting me, ma'am. It's a beautiful evening." His tone was respectful, his posture composed, his words carefully chosen. For a moment no one spoke. Then someone smiled. Another laughed softly, not at him, but in appreciation. A few guests leaned closer, curiosity replacing judgment entirely. Adorank felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Unease. The room no longer responded to her cues. Attention had shifted, quietly but decisively. The joke had arrived as planned, but instead of laughter, it brought silence. And instead of humiliation, it brought admiration. Adorank stood still, glass in hand, realizing too late that the moment she had orchestrated had slipped beyond her reach. The night had changed direction, and Sadiq, without raising his voice or changing his expression, had become the center of a story she could no longer control. The door behind him closed softly, and the real test was only beginning. The party never returned to what it had been before his arrival. That was the first truth Adorank could not escape. Music continued to play, carefully curated to maintain elegance, but it now felt secondary. Conversations resumed, yet they no longer followed her rhythm. The room had adjusted itself around a new presence, and no amount of practiced charm could pull it back into alignment. Sadiq stood calmly, neither pressing forward nor withdrawing. He did not scan the room in search of validation. He did not anchor himself to anyone powerful. He simply stood, grounded as though the space had always known him. And slowly, almost instinctively, the room responded. A woman near the center table tilted her head slightly, studying him. "There's something about him," she murmured. "He's not trying." A man beside her nodded. "That's usually the difference." Across the room, a group near the bar paused their conversation, eyes drifting back to Sadiq again and again. One of them frowned slightly, as though searching memory. "I feel like I've seen him somewhere," the man said. "Years ago, maybe." The others shrugged, unsure, but the thought lingered. Phones appeared, not boldly, but subtly, screens angled discreetly. A quiet attempt to capture a moment before it passed. Adorank felt it all. She smiled, but the muscles in her face tightened. The smile required effort now. Every laugh felt rehearsed, every movement slightly delayed. She could sense attention slipping from her grasp, and the sensation unsettled her deeply. She moved towards Sadiq with purpose. "Sadiq," she said, her voice still pleasant, though sharpened at the edges, "you can wait near the wall." The gesture was casual, dismissive, familiar. It was meant to remind everyone of hierarchy. Sadiq turned toward her. "Of course, ma'am," he said politely. He took a step back, but before he could reach the place she had indicated, a voice interrupted. "Actually," a guest said lightly, "we were just talking." The interruption was subtle, almost accidental, but it stopped him. Adorank hesitated. She searched the guest's face, weighing the moment, calculating the cost of pushing further. Sardik paused, then inclined his head slightly toward the guest. "Please." The conversation resumed naturally, as if it had never been interrupted. They asked where he was from. He answered simply, offering no unnecessary detail. They asked how long he had known Adorank. His reply was brief, respectful, neutral. He spoke only when needed, and when he did, people listened. His voice carried no urgency, no eagerness, no insecurity. He did not fill silence for comfort. He allowed pauses to exist, and the pauses made others lean in. Another guest joined the circle, then another. Soon Sardik was no longer a curiosity, he was a presence. Adorank watched from across the room, her fingers tightening around the stem of her glass. This was not laughter she could redirect. This was not a tension she could command back with a joke or a gesture. She moved through the room, greeting guests again, attempting to reassert herself. "Have you tried the appetizers? The terrace view is breathtaking. You must meet someone I know." But conversations drifted back. Across the room, Sardik listened as a woman spoke passionately about design. He nodded thoughtfully, then offered a single observation that caused her to stop mid-sentence. "That's true," she said slowly. "Most people don't notice that." He smiled faintly. "Details reveal intent." The words settled between them. A man nearby studied him openly now. "You're very composed," he said. "Most people are nervous in rooms like this." Sardik considered the statement. "I find calm useful," he replied. "It leaves room to observe." The response drew quiet laughter, not mocking, appreciative. Adorank's friends noticed. "This is getting uncomfortable," one whispered. Adorank said nothing. She approached again, her smile returning, practiced and bright. "You know," she said to the group, "Sardik is very dependable, always punctual, very consistent." She turned to him. "Isn't that right?" Sardik met her gaze briefly. "Yes, ma'am," he said evenly. The word echoed in the silence that followed, but it no longer framed him as lesser. It framed her. A guest laughed softly, then stopped, sensing the tension. Adorank felt something unfamiliar tighten in her chest. She had planned to expose him. Instead, she felt exposed herself. The circle around Sardik grew wider. Compliments came without excess. "You have an interesting presence. You speak thoughtfully. You listen well." Each comment pulled him deeper into the center of the evening. Adorank realized with growing unease that the night had shifted from spectacle to recognition. This was no longer about money. It was about command without force, authority without noise. She watched as Sardik laughed quietly at a remark, the sound brief and genuine. Not performed, not exaggerated, the guests responded naturally, drawn toward something they could not name but clearly felt. Adorank stood still, surrounded by people yet increasingly alone. The driver she had invited to be taught a lesson now stood at the heart of her celebration. And the room had chosen him. The shift was complete, and the consequences were only beginning to surface. By this point in the night, the change was no longer subtle. It did not announce itself. It did not demand attention. It simply took it. Adorank felt it in the way people no longer leaned toward her when she spoke, in the way laughter arrived a second too late, in the way conversations resumed even as she stood nearby, no longer pausing out of courtesy or calculation. Her party was still beautiful, the music still elegant, the guests still present. But something essential had moved, and it had moved toward Sardik. He had not done anything extraordinary. That was the part that unsettled her most. He had not delivered a speech. He had not introduced himself with significance. He had not revealed anything concrete. He had simply remained himself. And that had been enough. A small group formed around him again, not because he demanded it, but because people found themselves drifting closer without realizing why. Their questions were careful now, shaped by respect rather than curiosity. "You speak like someone who's lived widely," a man said. Sardik nodded once. "Life teaches whether we ask it to or not." Another guest tilted her head. "You don't seem impressed by any of this." Sardik glanced around the room briefly. It's impressive, but impressions fade. The words were not dismissive, just honest. They landed heavily. Adorank stood a few steps away, pretending to listen to someone else while every part of her focused on him. She watched the way people responded to his calm, the way they listened when he spoke, the way silence gathered naturally around him instead of being forced. This was not charm, this was authority without effort. She waited for him to overstep, for arrogance to show, for confidence to tip into pride, for the room to turn on him the way it always turned on outsiders. But Sadik did not take more than he was given. That restraint confused people who were used to competition. It fascinated them. Adorank finally stepped forward again, unable to contain herself any longer. "Sadik," she said, her voice smooth but tight, "you seem very comfortable." The sentence was simple, but it carried weight. A reminder of who had extended the invitation, of who believed she still held the reins. Sadik turned toward her fully now. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "Comfort helps people be themselves." The words echoed softly in the space between them. A guest nearby smiled faintly, another raised an eyebrow. Adorank forced a laugh. "I suppose not everyone feels that way in places like this." Her eyes held his, challenging him to contradict her. Sadik paused just long enough for the room to notice. "I've learned that places don't decide who we are," he said calmly. "People do." The silence that followed was complete, not awkward, focused. Adorank felt heat rise in her face. She sensed the attention shift again, this time not subtly but decisively. Eyes moved from her to him, measuring the exchange, reading between the words. She had meant to corner him. Instead, she had exposed herself. A man near the bar cleared his throat thoughtfully. "Forgive me," he said, addressing Sadik, "but I'm almost certain I've seen you before." Sadik smiled faintly, not confirming or denying. "Where?" someone asked eagerly. The man frowned, searching memory. "A long time ago. Something related to fashion. Or art." Murmurs followed. "Modeling? Advertising? Runway?" Sadik did not answer immediately. "I've taken many paths," he said finally. "Some visible, some not." That was all. But it was enough. Speculation spread quickly now, fueled by imagination rather than fact. People leaned in closer, eager to uncover what he refused to explain. Adorank's friends gathered near her again, their voices low. "This is going too far. You need to step in. He's stealing the night." Adorank nodded stiffly, but her confidence had eroded. Every instinct told her that pushing harder would only worsen the imbalance. The room no longer responded to her dominance, it responded to contrast, and she was losing. Across the room, someone asked Sadik for a photo. Then another. Then another. He agreed politely, never posing dramatically, never seeking angles. Just standing still, present, allowing the moment to pass through him. Each camera click felt like another small fracture in Adorank's control. She watched as people she had invited for status now orbited someone she had invited as a joke. The irony cut deeply. This was the moment she understood the mistake. She had believed power was something you displayed. Sadik understood it was something you carried. And as the night moved forward, it became painfully clear that the spotlight she had constructed with wealth, planning, and intention no longer obeyed her. It had found a steadier center. And Sadik, without raising his voice, without claiming anything, had become the axis around which the room now turned. The shift was complete. What remained was consequence. By this stage of the night, something fragile had settled over the room. The party was still alive in form. Music floated through the air, glasses were lifted and refilled. Laughter still surfaced, but it arrived late, cautious, as if people were listening for something beneath it. The evening had crossed a point of no return. Adorank felt it in her body before she accepted it in her mind. She stood in the center of her own mansion, surrounded by people she had invited, and yet she felt displaced. Conversations no longer bent toward her presence. Compliments no longer landed with the same weight. Guests acknowledged her with polite smiles, then subtly shifted their attention back to where the real gravity now lived. With Sadik, he had not claimed the center of the room. The room had reorganized itself around him. He stood near a low table, hands relaxed at his sides, listening more than speaking. When he did speak, it was never to dominate, never to impress. His words were measured, his tone calm, his timing exact. People felt seen around him, and that was dangerous. Adarang watched closely, her eyes following every small interaction. She noticed how guests leaned in when Sadiq spoke, how they paused to hear him finish, how laughter near him felt genuine, unforced. This was not coincidence. This was authority unfolding naturally. Her chest tightened as the truth pressed in. The night was no longer hers. She thought back to the invitation, the laughter, the confidence she had carried so easily. She had expected humiliation. She had expected control. Instead, she felt exposed. For the first time in years, Adarang did not know which move would restore her dominance. Every option carried risk. She could confront him openly. She could remind everyone of his position. She could attempt to turn the room against him, but the room was no longer hers to turn. Across the space, Sadiq sensed the shift. He did not look around sharply. He did not scan faces for reaction. He felt the tension the way experienced people do, through changes in breath, posture, silence. A woman standing near him smiled softly. "You're remarkably composed," she said. "Most people would be overwhelmed by now." Sadiq considered the comment. "Moments like this aren't about comfort," he replied quietly. "They're about restraint." The words traveled farther than intended. Adarang heard them clearly. They struck her not as accusation, but as reflection. Her friends gathered closer, voices lowered, urgency evident now. "This has gone too far. You're losing control of the room. He's making you look small." Adarang straightened instinctively. She lifted her chin, smoothed her dress, forced calm into her breathing. This was still her house, still her party, still her name on the invitation. She stepped forward. "Sadiq," she said, her voice slicing cleanly through the surrounding conversation. The effect was immediate. The room quieted. Not out of fear, out of anticipation. People sensed that something meaningful was about to unfold. Sadiq turned toward her slowly, fully. "Yes, ma'am," he said. The title echoed again. But now it carried no authority for her, only contrast. Adarang smiled, though the strain showed at the corners of her mouth. "I think you've had quite enough attention for one evening," she said lightly. "Why don't you assist the staff outside?" The phrasing was careful, polite, strategic. She was offering an exit disguised as instruction. Silence followed. This was the moment everyone recognized, the crossroads. Sadiq could challenge her. He could reveal everything. He could finally explain himself and seize the night openly. People watched him closely. They expected resistance. They expected pride. They expected revelation. Sadiq offered none of it. He nodded once. "Of course, ma'am," he said evenly. He turned slightly, as if to leave. A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. Brows furrowed. Smiles faded. People shifted in place. This was not the ending they wanted. Before Sadiq could take another step, a voice rose from the edge of the group. "Actually," a man said carefully, "we were hoping to continue our conversation." Another voice followed. "Yes, please. I had a question as well. I was enjoying that discussion." The words came not as defiance, but as invitation. Adarang froze. For the first time that night, she felt the full weight of what had happened. She no longer decided who stayed and who left. Sadiq paused, then turned back toward the group. "If you'll excuse me," he said politely to Adarang, "I was in the middle of something." The sentence was calm, but it carried finality. Eyes shifted back to Adarang. Not mocking, not hostile, observant, waiting. She felt the room watching her, measuring her next move. She could escalate, she could insist, she could expose herself completely. Instead, she did something she had not done all evening. She stepped back. She said nothing. Sadiq returned to the conversation without ceremony, no triumph, no acknowledgement of victory. The moment passed, but its meaning did not, because power had just changed hands without argument, without confrontation, without spectacle, and everyone in the room understood it. The quiet man she had invited as a joke had chosen restraint when revelation was available, and in doing so, he had proven something unmistakable. That dignity, once recognized, cannot be ordered away. The night continued, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The final revelation was approaching, and it would leave no one untouched. By the final stretch of the night, the mansion no longer felt like a place of celebration. It felt like a courtroom, not one ruled by law or judgment spoken aloud, but by awareness, by recognition, by the quiet understanding that something irreversible had already taken place. Guests still moved through the halls, but their movements were slower now, more deliberate. Conversations no longer floated on shallow admiration. They carried reflection, curiosity, meaning. The air itself felt heavier. At the center of it all stood Sadiq. He had not raised his voice once. He had not demanded space. He had not claimed importance. Yet importance had found him. Adorank watched from across the room, her posture carefully composed, her expression neutral in a way that betrayed effort. The woman who had once commanded attention effortlessly now measured every step, every word, every breath. For the first time in her life, she was aware of being observed, not admired. Observed. Sadiq stood surrounded by a small group, listening more than speaking. When he did speak, it was never to expand the moment, never to heighten it. He seemed intent on letting the night end quietly, as though he had already said everything that mattered. Then a man approached. He was older, distinguished, the kind of presence that drew recognition without introduction. Those who noticed him straightened slightly. Some stepped aside instinctively. He looked at Sadiq carefully, longer than necessary, then he smiled. "It really is you," he said, voice low but unmistakably certain. The words carried weight. Nearby conversations slowed, then stopped. Sadiq met his gaze without surprise. "It's been a long time." That was all it took. A ripple moved through the room. A woman leaned forward. "You know each other?" The man nodded. "I do. Or rather, I did. Years ago." Years ago. The phrase lingered. Adorank felt her chest tighten. The man continued, not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly enough for those nearby to hear. "You were everywhere once," he said to Sadiq. "Campaigns, editorial spreads, international showcases. People talked about you like you were the next great thing." Phones lowered, eyes sharpened. Sadiq remained still. "That life feels very far away," he replied calmly. The words "that life" echoed. Questions followed, no longer restrained. "You modeled. Why did you leave? Why disappear completely?" Sadiq raised his hand slightly, not to silence, but to slow the moment. "I didn't disappear," he said gently. "I stepped aside." Silence deepened. "I learned early that attention can become louder than truth," he continued, "and I wanted to hear my own life clearly." The room absorbed every word. A woman near the back spoke softly. "So you chose anonymity?" Sadiq nodded once. "I chose to be unknown long enough to understand who I was, without applause." Adorank felt something inside her collapse. This was not a reveal meant to dominate the room. It was not a confession designed to impress. It was an explanation offered without defense. Another guest asked carefully, "And driving?" Sadiq smiled faintly. "It teaches patience, observation, humility. It shows you how people treat you when they believe you have nothing to offer." The words settled like truth often does. Uncomfortable, undeniable. Adorank finally understood. The calm she had mocked was discipline. The silence she had dismissed was control. The dignity she had tried to strip away had been forged deliberately. And she had misread all of it. A woman stepped forward then, confident, professional, unmistakably purposeful. Those who knew the industry recognized her instantly. "We've been watching you tonight," she said honestly. "Your presence hasn't gone unnoticed. If you're open to it, we'd like to speak about opportunities." The room waited. This was the moment of triumph people expected. The return, the reclaiming, the applause. Sadiq smiled gently. "Perhaps," he said. "Another time." The refusal stunned them more than acceptance would have, because it made one thing clear. He did not need the moment needed him. Eyes turned again, slowly, inevitably toward Adorank. She felt them, not accusing, not mocking, measuring. She stepped forward, her movement slower now, her voice lower than it had been all evening. "Sadiq," she said. He turned toward her. "Yes, ma'am." The title no longer carried authority, it carried history. "I didn't know," she said finally. The admission was small, but it cost her everything. Sadiq regarded her calmly. "Most people don't," he replied. "They decide before they understand." The truth sat between them, exposed. Adorank nodded once. There was no defense left. No correction possible. Only acceptance. Around them, the party continued quietly, but its meaning had shifted entirely. People would leave with stories, not of extravagance, but of contrast. Of arrogance undone by restraint. Of power revealed through humility. As the night began to close, Sadiq excused himself. No announcements, no goodbyes. He moved toward the exit the same way he had entered. Calm, contained, complete. Adorank watched him go, standing alone in the space she had once ruled. The joke had ended, but the lesson would echo far beyond the walls of that mansion, because some people rise by stepping on others, and some rise simply by standing still long enough for the truth to speak. And that night, without shouting, without spectacle, without permission, Sadiq had been heard. Some stories end with applause, others end with silence. This one ends with a question. If you were in Adorank's place, would you have recognized dignity before it humbled you? And if you were in Sadiq's place, would you have chosen restraint or revenge? This story is a reminder that wealth can command attention, but character commands respect. That silence can speak louder than words, and that underestimating a quiet person is often the most expensive mistake of all. What moment in this story stayed with you the most? Was it the invitation meant as a joke, the calm that unsettled a room, or the moment truth revealed itself without force? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective matters. If you believe African billionaire folktales like this deserve to be told with depth, dignity, and meaning, then subscribe to this channel. Like this video to support serious storytelling, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story where power, pride, and truth collide. Because the next story may challenge everything you think you know.